Hi, everyone, and welcome. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are. I'm Leah Hines, Executive Director for the Charleston Conference, and I'd like to welcome all of you to today's webcast, Behind the Curtain, Cambridge Histories, Cambridge Companions, and Cambridge Elements. We have a good team of people here from Cambridge University Press to talk with us today. Before we get started on the presentation, just a few notes. This webinar is in listen-only mode, so we won't be able to hear you speaking with us, but we do have a live chat provided, so you can talk to us in the chat box. You can also choose private to presenter to send a message just to the hosts, and we'll answer those as quickly as possible. If you want to give it a try now, just use the attendee chat to say hello and let us know where you're listening from today. And then also, if we have any issues with computer audio, if you're not able to hear me, there's a phone icon. It looks like a gray telephone receiver. You can try using that to switch to using your telephone audio. But yeah, if you can try out that attendee chat, just let me know that it's working and just say hi and where you're listening from today. That would be great. Oh, from Yorkshire, England. Look at that. First, Sullivan's Island. Hi, Katina. For questions to the presenter about the webinar topic, what we're talking about today, there's a green icon with a question mark on it. That's for the Q&A. We're going to save questions to the end so that it's not going to interrupt the flow of the presentation. But we'll address all those questions at the very end with our presenters. This webinar is being recorded. We're going to make the slides available afterwards. It should be within 24 to 48 hours. So we'll have all of that available for you on the conference website very soon. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kelly, and she's going to introduce today's speakers and tell us a little bit about the presentation. I'm going to turn my webcam off. Oh, I'm sorry. Before I do that, I forgot. I have some poll questions for you guys. Let's get started with that before Kelly does the intro. Just very quickly, what type of attendee are you? Are you a librarian, a publisher, vendor, consultant, or other? And if you are other, let us know in that chat box what the other might be. So it looks like, let me see here, share the results there. Oh, half and half, look at that. Very cool. Thank you very much. I'll leave that up for just a second longer. Okay. So it looks like about 45% librarian, 55% publisher at this point. Let's go to the next question. How familiar are you with Cambridge reference products such as Cambridge Companions and Cambridge Histories? Very, somewhat, or not sure. So we've got, looks like most people are somewhat familiar. 65%, 29% not, or not sure. Leave that open for just a moment there. Thank you very much for those answers. Another question for you guys. Let's see here. How familiar are you with Cambridge Elements, the new short book format? Very, somewhat, or not familiar or not sure about it. Okay. So there's lots of people here to hear about Elements today. 65% versus 35% somewhat sure about it. Thank you. And finally, how does your library acquire new e-reference content? Through reviews or recommendations, by price, by faculty request, whether you have it in print. And unfortunately, we can only choose one of these, so just choose the one that fits best, and you can chime in the comments if you have more than one, or if you have something that's not listed here, something else. I'd love to hear from you on that. It's split pretty evenly there between reviews and recommendations, price point, and faculty request. All right, thank you once again for all of those poll answers and participation there. So now, with that, I will turn it over to Kelly, and thank you all very much, and I'll come back at the end for Q&A.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Kelly O'Rourke, Head of Library Sales for the Americas. We're here to talk about Cambridge University Press books from the editorial perspective. So Cambridge Elements, which we formally launched just last month, which is our new short form book format, as well as Cambridge Histories and Cambridge Companions. So joining me in Cambridge's New York office are two of my colleagues in editorial, Sara Doskow and Debbie Gershenowitz. Sarah Forsyth is also joining us in Toronto. She's our senior library sales rep for Canada, and she will chime in later if anyone has questions. So first off, we have Sara Doskow, editor for Political Science and Sociology, who will be talking about Cambridge Elements. And to follow, Debbie Gershenowitz, our senior editor for American and Latin American history and politics, will talk through Cambridge Histories and Cambridge Companions. Feel free to write in with questions. We'll be leaving time at the end for these, so we'll get to those as they come in for the end. And thanks again for joining. I will now pass it on to Sara.
Okay, hi everyone. Thanks for joining this. It sounds like Elements is new to most people, or fairly new to most people. So I'll start off by talking a bit about what Elements is and why we introduced it. Then I'll talk about some of the intellectual and teaching needs that it meets with the spotlight on political science. So I hope some of what I'll say about political science will apply more broadly to other disciplines. And then I'll talk a bit about how we commission Elements and give you some examples of some recent series we have, the elements coming out in them, and why I'm excited about them. So first, what Elements are. A lot of publishers have been experimenting with mid-length formats between books and articles. This is our response to that. So Elements are 20,000 to 30,000 word works. Usually that's about 45 to 75 pages. What distinguishes Cambridge Elements is they're focused in series collections, which are curated by leading scholars in the field. The individual elements within any given element series or collection are peer-reviewed and then published within 3 months of being accepted after peer review. Scholars have the ability to update elements annually if they so choose, and they're available in both print and digital, with digital being the primary format. As you know, most journals now are not accepting articles that are anywhere above 10,000 words. And, at Cambridge, we don't really publish books unless they're at least 70,000 words. So there's obviously a huge space between there. And that's somewhat arbitrary. You can argue that books and articles are a natural length, but I don't think anyone thinks that there would be no use for works that are shorter. Whenever you're introducing something new, though, that's not currently incorporated into people's career incentive structures, you want to make sure that it will be used. So for us, that was why we decided to think about series. We wanted to make sure that these elements would be used, that they'd be financially viable for us, and that they'd be worth our authors' time to write. So the idea of having a series is that the series editors are curating something very deliberately. They're not accepting sort of long-form articles that are coming in through the transom. They're actively commissioning pieces and looking to build an architecture for the field. We publish several different kinds of work within the Element series. So we publish, first of all, synthesis and review pieces that can be useful for graduate training and undergrad training, and possibly, even advanced scholars who are looking to familiarize themselves with a different subfield than they normally work in. Sometimes we'll publish works that are more like think pieces that develop new concepts and set an agenda for future empirical work. We're also publishing new empirical work. There I'd emphasize we're doing that in cases where we know there will be a broad academic audience for it. We don't want anything that's too narrow or feels like a long article. And finally, we're doing master classes and tutorials, I would say, especially in the STM fields, but also to some extent in social science. Within each discipline, and even within subfields for the discipline, scholars have identified, very different needs that the format can meet for their specific research and teaching community. I'll talk a bit about political science just to bring that home in more concrete terms. So, a few things that have come out very strongly are one is that the field allows scholars to be responsive to changing concerns and new emerging political realities. So that's true both because of the 12-week production schedule, but also because of shorter format. It takes less time to write. You can develop and get an idea out there much more quickly. We don't, political science is obviously the study of politics. It's different than journalism. We're not expecting our authors to be journalists, but we would like to give them a space where they can weigh in on themes that deserve more scholarly attention than they've received before, and do so in a timely way. Second, I would say that elements allow scholars to provide synthesis. This is true of political science, it's true of all disciplines. As the fields move further and further towards specialization and we get these more niche pieces, we think there's a real intellectual need for synthesis pieces where people can take a step back and evaluate the big picture. What are the gaps in the knowledge? How does this and that fit together? That's not really something that there's a space for in current journals, maybe with the exception of annual review pieces. Third, and related to the above, it gives scholars a format where they can develop new concepts ahead of empirical work. So to publish a book with Cambridge or to publish an article, usually that would need to be empirically based. But a lot of times people have a big idea that might be pursued empirically by tons of different people with different expertise, and this is where they can generate that idea and generate discussion. And I'll give you an example, because I know that can sound very abstract when discussed in the abstract. Finally, we are publishing new empirical work within Elements. We've found, there again, I'd emphasize we're looking for new empirical work that will have a broad audience. We found that this format can meet certain needs that are not being met by current articles and books. So within political science, I think this is especially good for qualitative and mixed methods research, and I'd add especially comparative and historical analysis, where you often, if you have multiple countries and your argument is historically informed, it takes a lot of space to be able to set up and give context for those countries. But you might have an idea that you can develop pretty efficiently, in 50 pages without writing a full book. Within political science, journals, I would say there's less interdisciplinary work in journals, and journals are also really emphasizing a specific kind of causal inference claim in political science right now. And that, one can debate that, but one can certainly also think of all sorts of types of research questions that you can easily set up an experiment to test. So this sort of broadens what you can pursue in the disciplinary space. And it also helps us bring different disciplines together. In a lot of areas, we've been looking at multidisciplinary thematic series. All of my series editors are open to all of these kinds of work, so review pieces, think pieces, and new empirical work. But what I want to stress is that all my series editors are thinking very, very intentionally about making sure that the series is curated and intentional, and they're thinking about audience. So a good litmus test for us is to ask whether a given element will either be used in graduate or undergraduate training or read by a large swath of the subfields. So to commission elements, our first step is always to find a series editor. So we've been thinking sort of broadly about what areas we want to develop series in. They're mapping broadly onto subfields or sort of large groups of scholars that might be, the basis of a large section within the American Political Science Association. So we have American politics, international relations, Latin American politics and society, Southeast Asian politics and society. I'm working right now on having one on race, on political communication and news media. So these are some of those ideas. For series editors, we're looking for people who are smart, for people who are well networked, and where their stamp on a series will mean something to the authors that they're recruiting. I am always looking for people who will approach the subject in a sort of out-of-the-box way. We want to make sure that we find people who the format resonates for, and they can sort of think creatively about very specific needs the format can meet for their subfields. And finally, I'd say, it's important to us that we not pick anyone who has a narrow view of the field or might be cliquey and only publishing their friends. The series editors are basically standing in for the in-press editor, so we want them to create an inclusive collection. The series editors will put together a proposal where they'll articulate a broad vision for the series, and then list some of the authors and topics that they'd like to recruit projects on. Those series proposals go, I would say, to about 5 to 10 reviewers, and that's to make sure that there is a market and to get as much input as we can on what kinds of content people would find useful to be published in the series. That then goes to our syndicate board. Once a series is syndicated, we empower the academic series editors to do what normally the in-house Cambridge editor would do. So that series editor will be responsible for recruiting authors and then for having their projects reviewed. Each element has both the series editor's input at various stages as well as external readers' input. So there's a lot that's going into developing these pieces. And in most series, I would say 95% of the content is content that the series editors are actively recruiting. We're not, in general, that open to submissions that are coming, which isn't to say we're not, but it would have to sort of meet the criteria we have for the market and for whether it fits into a curated collection. What series look like? So I'll take this opportunity to describe and hopefully pitch a few series. One series that I'm excited about is our Cambridge Element series in American politics. I started to talk to the series editor early in 2016 before the election, and then the proposal finally came in January at the start of Trump's term. So this series, we want it to be open to new empirical work that's relevant to a broad audience, and also to synthesis and review pieces that will revisit old theories in American politics and bring in new data and cases to assess whether old theories still hold. So I have on the slide here comparative U.S. populism and comparative perspective. American politics has usually been a subfield separate from comparative politics. I think after the election, there's been a lot of interest in hearing what comparativists have to say, or what their frameworks can teach us about American politics. The Elements format is perfect for that because it's short. So a scholar who normally works in comparative but is feeling really compelled to speak to what's happening at home is able to develop a piece in a shorter format. We have something that just published, I believe, this week on legislative hardball. That's about the Freedom Caucus, or it uses the Freedom Caucus as a case study to look at how factions within parties exert influence. We have something else that's in production coming out soon on how the environment became a partisan issue in the US that goes back historically. I think that would be excellent in courses. The series editor who's in charge of that is Frances Lee at Maryland. And one thing she says is her students study politics, so they're very focused on the present. They always want to know if old ideas still hold with new data. So that was one thing she really liked about the format. Then we have a series, Latin American Politics and Society. This is one of the more multidisciplinary series. So we're focused on political questions, but we define the political pretty broadly. So that bringing together different social sciences is one aim. We also wanted to give more visibility to perspectives from the region, so from scholars who are either currently based in Latin America or who have roots in Latin America, even if they're trained in now at universities in the US or Canada. And with that, we're interested in the field. A lot of the work in the field has been very focused on formal political institutions and applying theories that were developed in the US onto Latin America. The series editors for this are very interested in how formal institutions intersect with informality in the region. If the institutions don't really have much teeth for enforcement. So you can see on the slides, you might not be able to read it, but it says The Politic of Institutional Weakness by Vicky Murillo, Stephen Levitsky, who wrote How Democracies Die, if any of you have read that, and Dan Brinks. So that's, they're laying out a framework for thinking about weak institutions and how might these actually be intentional, what uses do they serve, and then how can future scholars measure. So that's an example, I would say, of the kind of element that develops a new conceptualization. We have something coming soon from Maristela Zvampa, who's an Argentine sociologist, kind of a public intellectual. She normally writes in Spanish, but we've secured funding to translate this, so that will be on socio-environmental conflicts in Latin America. Other forthcoming ones will look at negative partisanship in the region, the historical evolution of state strength and democratization. How do you have democracy if you have weak states? So that just gives you an idea of some of those there. I think the people who are writing all of these are pretty high profile, so we're expecting these to be read widely. I'm being told that I'm going over, so I will turn this over to my colleague Debbie now.
Hi, everyone. I am Debbie Gershenowitz, and I'm useless when it comes to PowerPoint presentations, so I am going to ask Kelly to show me what to do. Okay. Hi again, and thank you, Sarah. I think Sarah needs to get another one of these just to talk about elements, because they are much more nuanced and new, and I think there's a lot more to learn about them than there might be about the things I'm going to talk to you about today. So I'll make this brief so we can open up the room for questions. So I'm going to talk about three products that are somewhat related: the Cambridge Histories. I'm going to speak a little tiny bit on concise histories, and I'm going to speak about Cambridge Companions. For the librarians in the room, I hope you, because they've been around for a long time, much longer than any of us here in this room at Cambridge have been at Cambridge. So they are marquee products for us. Not even though they're called histories, they across the humanities, I would say, they are widely published. So I am a history editor, but I have colleagues in literature, in music, in classics. There are a lot of different editors here at the press, again, especially in the humanities, that are doing these kind of books. But I'm going to focus on the discipline of US and Latin American history today, because that's what I do. So I'm going to talk about, I'm going to say what each of these three different product types are very briefly, and then I want to just talk a little bit about, I want to go behind the curtain of the acquisitions process, because that might give you a better sense of sort of all the stuff that happens at my desk before it even goes into production, and let alone before it gets to Kelly's team and our marketing group. So the Cambridge Histories are big reference books, and now we do sell them online. They're authoritative, narrative-based overviews of big topics or eras or places in history or related themes. We do have, I believe the literature group has done some Cambridge histories of Irish literature, in history. We have, a 13-volume Cambridge history of Latin America. We have 3-volume histories of World War I and World War II, and just a host of others. I mean, go to our webpage or the core page, and you can see just the huge array of work we do. But they're written as largely synthetic narratives. There's a general editor of a particular reference set, and then she or he will assign chapter topics to other experts in the field. But they are all supposed to adhere to a certain kind of writing style, which is not, the best way I could describe it is it's not a handbook. We're not getting into deep conversations about state of the field historiography or pedagogical topics. The handbooks I find are very useful, but they are not necessarily consistently narrative. And I think they can sometimes be of greater value to specialists. The histories, we find that they are used by some high school students that they get in their public libraries, college students that they'll find at their institutions. Most of the professors that I deal with at my job have Cambridge histories either in their fields or in other fields that they might be interested in, because these pieces really stand the test of time, and are wonderful overviews. They're published as hardbacks, primarily for libraries in the first year, and recently we have been bringing them out in paperback in year 2, more for the individual reader. That's a somewhat newish change in the way we used to publish Cambridge histories. An important change, too, is that we used to eke these out. You know, we would basically sign and publish. So we might, the 13-volume history of Latin America was published over many, many years. I inherited the Cambridge History of Science, which is 8 volumes. The first volume just came out a few months ago. The 8th volume is coming out sometime in the next year. So the tradition was, let's do many, many volumes in a set, but we'll publish them when they're done. We've changed that, and that might be, some of you may be noticing that, you know, we haven't maybe had a ton of Cambridge histories publishing at once, because we're publishing them as full sets. So the trend that we've been doing here at the press is smaller collections, you know, 3 volumes, maybe 4 volumes. We're trying to do more 2 volumes and publish them at the same time so people can buy them as sets. A few that I'm excited about. So I'm jumping ahead to how I acquire, but I'll just say briefly that I was brought in about 6 years ago to really ramp up the lists in U.S. history, especially, and to a lesser degree Latin American history. So I've basically been focusing all my efforts there, especially on American history. So in the fall, we have the Cambridge History of the American Civil War coming out, I think in November. We're very excited about that. It's a 3-volume set. In 2021, I have a Cambridge History of America and the World, which is kind of the new way of talking about the history of American foreign relations, and many more that Kelly or others can tell you about down the road. The concise histories are something that are geared more toward individual purchase, so I'm not sure how many libraries buy them, but they, in a way, are broader than a Cambridge history because they're short and synthetic, so you want to cover a lot of ground, and they are aimed at individual readers. And we have found historically that business travelers and tourists tend to buy these. They have always been on places. The slide lists a few of our recent ones, 2 of which are on places, but one of them, the Concise History of History, is pointing to a new direction we're experimenting with Team History about some interesting themes, in part because we're running out of places to cover, but also, I have signed a concise history of the Aztecs. I would like to see how that does, and then perhaps do one on the Maya and the Inca, so looking at the great empires of the Americas. And then for me, because we have published less in the Americas, I'm really looking to fill in the gaps, especially in Latin America and the Caribbean. So I'll be having some new titles coming out for that region. They are single-authored histories, so that's what makes them different from both the Cambridge histories and the companions that I will talk about right now. The companions, actually, Team History has been sort of late to do the companions, and they've been really owned by our humanities team. The lit people, the music people, the classics people. They've done an awful lot of those. These are short-ish, I put on the slide because sometimes they can be long, anthologies on key themes thus far in culture, and we're trying to expand that into history. The ideal is that this is a teaching book. The reality is that teaching an anthology can be challenging, so we really try to go for subjects that will map onto the classroom when we're commissioning these. I've put a few examples up on the slide that are all more from cultural studies, but in history, two ones that we have under contract right now is the companion to the Dutch Golden Age, and then I have recently signed a companion to the Latin American revolutions, which I'm planning to come out in 2021, which is the 200th anniversary of when a lot of the revolutions are happening. So we'll see how those do. So now, if I have any time, maybe I'll talk just briefly about what we do as editors when we're commissioning these things. And I just want to stress that it's a really long process, because unlike, as Sara said in her bit about the elements, we don't publish things that are coming over the transom. These kind of works, reference works, really put the commissioning in the term commissioning editors, which is what we do. We step back and speak with experts in the field. We use our own knowledge of the field. We do market research to find out what those gaps are. What subject might best map itself to all these kinds of products that we're talking about? That can be a long process. This is why we go to conferences and talk to academics all the time. And often, my first choice of an editor might not accept the job, because we are going out and saying to a professor, will you please edit a 3-volume history? I'm going to use the Civil War as an example because that's what I have coming out. I had a list of potential series editors for the Cambridge history of the Civil War. They were all leading scholars in the field who were very well networked and well published. For any of these projects, the elements, not the concise histories, but the elements and the companions and the histories, the networks really matter, and not just the networks, but I would also say the likability of the general editor, because this person is basically trying to get others to do work for them for not a huge payoff. So it's really important that you find the right person. I got lucky with the Civil War. My second choice accepted the gig, and he was attractive to me for all the reasons I said about networks and seniority in the field. But he had also, and I learned this in my market research, he had done a handbook of the Civil War for Wiley. So I knew he knew how to do these, because it's very important that you find someone who can know how to do one. Not all researchers are the same, and some excel at writing monographs, some excel at editing large volumes. So it's really important that we find that. So all of that takes time to do the research. And then Sara mentioned proposal. We need to get a proposal, and that does involve often a lot of fine tuning on the part of the editor, filling in gaps that the author might have about, say, the market, about competition. So there's a back and forth fine tuning process of a proposal. It then has to be peer reviewed. So all of this can take, sometimes I have projects, Cambridge History is on my wish list that I would love to sign, but some of them, it's been 5 years and I'm still looking to find the right person. So it is really sort of the commissioning process is identifying those gaps, doing the right market research, and then really being a cruise director on all of these products we've discussed today. There's so many different moving parts. There's general editors to keep track of. There's payments to be given to all of these contributors. There's their contracts. There's all of the particularities about getting things to the press in the right form so we will publish it effectively. So it's a many, many, many stepped process that's going on behind the scenes before you see it in the selection of wonderful arrays that our sales and marketing team offer you. So I want to wrap it up because I want there to be time for lots of questions, but I think I speak for all of us here on the Cambridge end. Please do ask anything. Anything is up for discussion, and we're happy to take them all. Or if people just want us to speak more about anything we've touched on today, please say so.
All right. Thank you so much, Debbie and Sara. We just have kind of one more slide here to run through as far as a bit of a reminder about some of our acquisition models. And then, as Debbie says, yes, we would love to take any questions any of you might have. So please feel free to write those in. So, of course, all of these products are available in print. And then, along with that, we've got Cambridge Histories, Cambridge Companions, and Cambridge Elements all available on Core, our digital platform. So within Core, which provides kind of unlimited DRM-free access to our content, there's kind of a wide, really quite flexible options as far as purchasing goes. So libraries can purchase a single title of any of these on Cambridge Core, all the way to kind of smaller regional or thematic collections within any of these for the histories and companions. And then elements are broken down either by subject or by series, along with kind of custom or single title purchasing. In addition, for Cambridge Companions and Cambridge Histories in particular, we do offer purchase for the full archive of those titles. So that's available, and we have developed actually tiered pricing for that acquisition so that it is kind of available for a wide range of institutions. Along with the full archive, since we do add new books every year, libraries have the option to acquire the new content top-ups as well beyond the archive. And then finally, Cambridge Companions Online is available as a subscription with access to the full run of titles. So that is stands out there a bit from the other products as far as access goes and acquisition model. All right, so let's see if we have any questions. Let's check here.
We have one that's in the queue from Catherine Rose, and then we have one from Teresa Wirtz in the chat box. So which would you prefer to do first?
Well, I've pulled up the Q&A box, so I guess
Gotcha.
that. The question here is, how do you know that the content in the anthologies is the content that the students actually need?
I would say that's a really key part of peer review. We try to, we really curate our reviewers. So if, say, I'm going after something that I want to reach students, I'm not going to pick a reviewer who only teaches graduate students. I'm really trying to match the right reviewers to target who the target audience is for. And we ask reviewers specifically, does this content or this proposed content reach the needs of your students, or to your best of the best of your knowledge, the students in this field?
Do you want to add that? Exactly what you said.
All right. Let's see what we've got in the chat box. Teresa says, noticed Elements is online and contains new media. Is each title following a content design, and does it have the same components?
No, I would. It's pretty flexible. So we have a text design for each element. Not all elements will have media. I think it really depends on the need for the individual volume. So, in something that's very media heavy or cultural studies, we might have more videos. Everything is also, we're making it available in print too. So we need to be conscious that the element will work as a standalone print edition alongside the more enhanced online version. Some will have code. I think some of the more technical computational ones. But yeah, I would say each series, you'll see the covers. We're branding each series with its own cover, and then the text design is the same across different elements.
So yeah, I think just to add there from the Cambridge Core perspective for Elements generally, I know that Elements were kind of conceptualized as digital first, even though we do provide the print. So there are capabilities to support all kinds of things, though not every element certainly is featuring all of those, as Sarah just said. By the way, if anyone has any follow-up questions or comments, please feel free to add those as well. And then from Katina, we have, are students ever peer reviewers?
No. No. And this is, there are many reasons why they're not, but I believe it's sort of generally probably a dictate from most of the university press world that our peer reviewers have to be or should be tenured specialists in the field.
All right, let's see if there's anything else here. Any other questions from anyone that they'd like to add in now?
I'll add something.
Sure.
So again, while we don't have students act as peer reviewers, certainly, and I think this is probably done especially via our higher education team, once a book is out, follow-up should be done either by the editor or by marketing or professors who teach the material with their students on how effective was the material. And for certain books, again, this is more for textbooks, we try to get people, if we're doing a second edition of a textbook, we will try to make sure that our peer reviewers are people who have actually taught the first edition of that book. So the people who are reviewing have had experience and feedback from students.
All right. Sara, was there anything I missed as far as the sales models here or anything on this last slide that should be potentially called out to everyone?
No, I think that pretty much covers all the options for elements, companions, and histories. As Kelly mentioned, the companions pricing, both the archive and the subscription pricing, is based on FTE. So if you do have a question about that, please get in touch with us or your sales rep, and we'll pass that on.
Do either of you have questions?
Yeah, I just suggested perhaps in lieu of you. So I'm sorry for being inarticulate. I was wondering if any of us here at Cambridge have any questions we could ask you, and you can write in the answers. I'm thinking, and I might be speaking for Sara, so tell me to shut up. But on the survey we had, it seemed like sort of the biggest learning curve is with Elements, which is not surprising because that's our newest product. Can we think of any questions for the audience? Maybe for those in the audience, how have you learned about this? What would you like to see? For those of you who haven't learned about it, what are the ways you learn about new products? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Can I throw that out to the crowd and get some answers? Because that would certainly help us as we commission, publish, and sell these.
Yeah, and I'd be interested in, obviously we're publishing multiple kinds of works within any given series. If there are any that you think really resonate with you and the community at your institution, I'd be very interested to hear which those are.
While people are thinking about that, I was going to mention, you asked how people heard about things. The Cambridge Elements, we had a session at the Charleston conference in November all about short books. It was Steve Weiland from Michigan State and Matthew Ismail from Central Michigan, and they mentioned several different types of short book series, and Cambridge Elements was one of the ones that they talked about briefly, in addition to Against the Grain publishes the Charleston Briefings, and there was another one from Oxford that was listed in there. So that was a whole session on short books, why they are published, the obstacles they face, and their prospects for success. So I thought that was a nice tie-in there. And I think we do have a couple of questions. Kelly, if you guys, are you still there? Did the video just drop?
Yeah,
Or you...
we lost our camera, but our mic works.
Gotcha. So there are a couple of questions that people have put in to the Q&A. Susan asks, where can list of upcoming elements or companions or histories or concise histories be found on an ongoing basis?
That sounds like a marketing question or sales.
So
If you have a link we could drop into the chat box for people to find those lists of upcoming titles.
So just so is it just where can everyone kind of find the list of all upcoming titles? Is that it?
Looks like it. Susan, is that the right answer? Or the right question, rather? I don't know if Susan... I think that's the question. Where can they find upcoming lists of titles?
So we do have a kind of a title list on Cambridge Core that has really everything listed that's just recently come out. But as far as forthcoming titles, Sarah, I don't know what the best way to provide that is. I know for kind of the new, for histories, for example, we have a new content collection every year. So often our reps are in touch directly with institutions providing that information. But I don't know if there's another option.
I would just mention on Cambridge Core, there's a hub where you can see all the series that we have, and that will show, if you click on an individual series, it'll show you forthcoming publications. It won't show you things that are not yet in production, but it will show you things that have passed the final stage of acceptance and are within 3 months of publishing.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll just add that when we do publish the Cambridge Histories annual collections as advanced collections, so titles are added to your collection as they publish throughout the year, and we do provide a list of projected titles and guarantee sort of a minimum number of titles in that collection, even though we don't have a complete title list at the beginning of the year.
Okay, thank you. Susan she asked a follow-up question about our specific core pages where upcoming, I think you just answered that. If any of you have a link to any of that, though, if you could put that in the chat box, that would be great, or maybe tell me where to find it and I can drop the link in there as well.
Yeah, sure. We'll pull that up and send that along once we've got it.
Okay. And then there was another question. What kinds of multimedia do you offer in Elements?
We're looking at video. I think we're still experimenting, and some of it is we're waiting for the functionality on Core, but certainly videos, code and more technical books can be extracted, a lot of times supplementary data. You can see color images. We're looking at more ways to experiment with data visualization and graphics that might move. Those are some of what we've been thinking about. Sorry, I'm just looking for this link that shows you the...
I will say that there's also an Elements landing page on Core as well that I think should have some freely accessible elements for you to look at as well. So we can follow up and send that now, so you can take a look at some of what's being featured currently.
And there's one more.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions from the group?
Oh, there's more links. Thank you again. Any other questions or thoughts or comments?
Sorry.
Go ahead.
If people have questions later, is there information on how they can get them to us?
Yes, so when we post the video and the slides, we can put contact information as well, and that way people can reach out and ask questions afterwards if they think of anything.
Great.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, if there are no other questions or discussion, I just wanted to thank all of our presenters for joining us today, the group both in New York and in Canada. So Kelly and Debbie and Sara, thank you very much for being here, for presenting and giving us a peek back, behind the scenes, behind the curtain today. The video will be available just within a couple of days, and we'll email everyone who registered and let them know when it's available. So thanks again, and we'll see you next time for one of the next Charleston Conference webinars. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.